The stranger rode into Hawthorne, Nevada on a dusty afternoon in July of 1878, and Rebecca Zimmerman watched him from behind the mercantile counter with the kind of careful attention a woman alone in the world learned to cultivate. He was the biggest man she had ever seen, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle, his dark hair falling past his collar in waves that caught the harsh sunlight filtering through the window. He dismounted with an easy grace that belied his size, his buckskin shirt stretched tight across his chest, and when he turned toward the store, she found herself holding her breath without quite knowing why. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Rebecca straightened, smoothing her apron with hands that had worked too hard for her 22 years. The mountain man had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and when he straightened, his pale blue eyes found hers immediately. They were striking against his sun-weathered skin, sharp and intelligent, and she felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in her bones. "Need to stock up on some supplies." "Of course," Rebecca managed, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "What can I help you find?" He moved through the store with the careful precision of a man accustomed to tight spaces, listing off items in that deep, measured tone. Flour, coffee, salt pork, ammunition. Rebecca gathered each item, acutely aware of his presence as he followed her through the narrow aisles. When their fingers brushed as she handed him a tin of coffee, she felt a jolt of electricity that made her pull back too quickly. "Sorry," they both said at the same time, and then he did something unexpected. He smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face and made him look younger than she had first thought. Maybe 30, she guessed, or close to it. "I am Garrett Anderson," he said, setting the coffee down gently. "Been living up in the mountains about 15 miles north of here. Do not come to town much, but I ran low on necessities." "Rebecca Zimmerman," she replied, finding herself returning his smile despite the ingrained caution that usually governed her interactions with strangers. "I run the mercantile with my uncle, though he is getting on in years and mostly leaves the work to me now." Garrett nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "That is a lot of responsibility for one person." "I manage," Rebecca said, a hint of pride in her voice. She had been managing since she was 15 when her parents died of cholera and she came west to live with her mother's brother. 7 years of hard work had made her capable and independent, even if it had also made her wary of trusting too easily. As she tallied his purchases, other customers began filtering into the store. Rebecca recognized them immediately. Martha Caldwell and her daughter Penelope, 2 of Hawthorne's most prominent citizens. Martha's husband owned the bank, and they lived in the largest house on Main Street. Martha's eyes swept over Garrett with barely concealed disdain, her lips pursing as she took in his rough clothing and wild appearance. "Rebecca," Martha said coldly, not bothering with a greeting, "we need to speak with you about the dance tomorrow evening." Rebecca's stomach tightened. The summer dance was the social event of the season, held in the newly constructed town hall. She had been looking forward to it for weeks, had even spent precious money on fabric to make a new dress. "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell." Martha's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something cruel in her eyes. "The organizing committee has been discussing it, and we have decided that your attendance would not be appropriate." The words hung in the air like stones. Rebecca felt her face flush hot, then cold. "I do not understand." "Your uncle," Penelope said, speaking up with obvious relish. "He has been drinking again, creating scenes at the saloon, making a spectacle of himself. The committee feels that your family's behavior reflects poorly on the respectable citizens of Hawthorne, and we cannot have that association at our event." Rebecca's hands clenched into fists at her sides. It was true that her uncle had taken to drink in recent months, his grief over his late wife manifesting in increasingly erratic behavior. But Rebecca had nothing to do with his choices, and she had worked tirelessly to maintain the mercantile and their reputation. "That is not fair," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to control it. "I have done nothing wrong." "Nevertheless," Martha said with finality, "the decision has been made. We wanted to inform you personally rather than have you show up and be turned away at the door. I am sure you understand." Before Rebecca could respond, Garrett stepped forward. He moved with deliberate slowness, but there was something intimidating about his sheer size as he positioned himself beside Rebecca. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "that a woman should not be held accountable for the actions of others." Martha's eyes widened slightly, flickering between Garrett and Rebecca. "This is a private matter, sir. It does not concern you." "I reckon anything that causes hurt to decent folks concerns me," Garrett replied. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Miss Zimmerman here has shown me nothing but courtesy and kindness. Seems a shame to punish her for things she cannot control." "The decision is final," Martha said, drawing herself up. "Come along, Penelope. We have other errands to complete." They swept out of the store in a rustle of skirts, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Rebecca stood frozen, humiliation washing over her in waves. She had tried so hard to be respectable, to prove herself worthy of acceptance in this harsh town. And now, because of her uncle's weakness, she was being cast out of polite society. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. "I apologize," she said stiffly, turning back to his purchases. "Let me finish tallying your items." "You have nothing to apologize for," Garrett said gently. "Those women were cruel for no good reason." "They had reason enough," Rebecca said bitterly. "My uncle has become the town drunk. Everyone knows it. I suppose I should have expected this." She finished the calculation with trembling fingers and told him the total. Garrett counted out the coins carefully, then added an extra silver dollar. "For your trouble," he said when she tried to protest, "and for dealing with those harpies." Despite everything, Rebecca felt a small smile tug at her lips. "That is too generous." "Not nearly generous enough," Garrett said. He gathered his supplies but paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Miss Zimmerman, I think you deserve better than this town seems willing to give you." After he left, Rebecca stood alone in the empty store, those words echoing in her mind. She closed early that evening, unable to bear the thought of more customers who might have heard about her exclusion from the dance. Her uncle was passed out in his room when she returned to their small house behind the mercantile, reeking of whiskey and stale tobacco. She looked at him with a mixture of love and frustration. This man who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, who was now too lost in his own grief to see how he was dragging her down with him. That night, Rebecca lay awake in her narrow bed, thinking about the dance she would not attend and the mountain man with kind eyes who had defended her to women, who would never see her as their equal. She wondered if she would ever see Garrett Anderson again, or if he would disappear back into his mountains and become just another brief encounter in her lonely life. The next day passed in a blur of customers and routine tasks. Rebecca threw herself into her work, cleaning shelves that were already clean, organizing inventory that was already organized, anything to keep her mind off the dance that evening. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Nevada desert in shades of gold and crimson, she heard the sounds of townspeople preparing for the festivities. Music drifted through the air, fiddles and guitars tuning up, laughter and excited voices carrying on the warm breeze. Rebecca stood in the doorway of the mercantile, watching people make their way toward the town hall in their finest clothes. She had put on her new dress despite everything, a simple but pretty thing in blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. It seemed foolish now, this small act of defiance that no one would even see. She was about to go back inside when she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the dusty street. Garrett Anderson rode toward her through the gathering dusk, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. He had cleaned up, his hair still damp and slicked back, his face freshly shaved. He wore clean trousers and a white shirt that somehow made him look even larger and more imposing, the fabric stretched across his muscled chest and arms. But it was the expression on his face that stopped her heart, a mixture of determination and something softer, something that made her pulse quicken. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, swinging down from his horse with that easy grace. "I was hoping I would find you here." "Mr. Anderson," she replied, confusion and hope warring in her chest. "I thought you would have returned to your mountain by now." "I had planned to," he admitted, moving closer. "But I could not stop thinking about what those women said to you yesterday, about how they treated you." He paused, and in the fading light his blue eyes were intense. "I came back to ask if you would allow me to escort you to the dance." Rebecca's heart sank. "I told you I am not welcome there. They will turn us away at the door." "I know," Garrett said simply, "and I do not care. You deserve to have a good evening, to wear that pretty dress and dance and be treated with the respect you have earned. If they will not let you inside their fancy hall, then we will dance somewhere better." "Mr. Anderson, I cannot ask you to do this," Rebecca said, even as everything in her yearned to say yes. "You will make yourself unwelcome in Hawthorne as well." "I am already unwelcome in most places," Garrett said with a wry smile. "Being a mountain man means folks tend to see you as more animal than human. One more town thinking poorly of me makes no difference to my life." He held out his hand, large and calloused and steady. "But it would make a difference to my evening if you would say yes." Rebecca looked at his outstretched hand, at the earnest expression on his weathered face, and felt something inside her crack open. When was the last time someone had stood up for her? When had anyone last made her feel like she mattered, like she was worth defending? "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I would be honored." The smile that broke across Garrett's face was like sunrise, brilliant and transforming. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. They walked together through the darkening streets of Hawthorne, toward the sound of music and laughter. As they approached the town hall, Rebecca saw the warm glow of lanterns through the windows, the silhouettes of dancers moving inside. Martha Caldwell stood at the entrance with her husband, greeting arrivals with practiced smiles. Her expression froze when she saw Rebecca approaching on Garrett's arm. "Miss Zimmerman," she said coldly, "I thought I made it clear that you were not invited." "You did," Garrett said before Rebecca could respond, "and I heard you loud and clear. We are not here to force our way into your dance." He turned to Rebecca, and the gentleness in his eyes made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced. "Miss Zimmerman has agreed to dance with me this evening. Since you have made it plain she is not welcome in your hall, we will find our own place." He led her away from the entrance, away from Martha's shocked expression and the whispers of onlookers. Rebecca's face burned with a mixture of embarrassment and defiance as they walked past the town hall, past the edge of the settlement, out into the open desert where the darkness was gathering. She could still hear the music, faint now but carrying on the evening air. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked softly. "You will see," Garrett replied. He led her to a small rise about 100 yards from town, a place where the ground was smooth and flat, covered in sparse desert grass. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue of the sky. The music from the town hall drifted across the distance, and Garrett turned to face her, bowing slightly in a gesture that was both courtly and somehow perfectly suited to him. "Miss Zimmerman," he said formally, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were not from humiliation. "I would be delighted, Mr. Anderson." He took her hand in his other hand settling lightly on her waist, and they began to move. Garrett was surprisingly graceful for such a large man, leading her through a simple waltz that matched the distant music. Rebecca followed easily, her body responding to his guidance as if they had danced together 100 times before. The world seemed to fall away until there was nothing but the two of them, moving together under the emerging stars, the vast Nevada sky opening above them like a cathedral. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, looking up at him. "You did not have to do this." "Yes, I did," Garrett replied, his voice rough with emotion. "From the moment I walked into your store yesterday, I have not been able to stop thinking about you, and when those women treated you with such cruelty, it made me angry in a way I have not felt in years." He paused, searching her face. "I know we barely know each other, but I needed you to understand that you deserve better. You deserve kindness and respect and beautiful evenings like this." Rebecca's breath caught. "You barely know me," she echoed. "Why would you care so much?" "I cannot explain it," Garrett admitted. "But I recognize something in you, something I see in myself. You are strong and capable and good, but this world has tried to make you small, tried to make you believe you are less than you are." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "I spent years alone in those mountains because it was easier than dealing with people who only saw a rough man with no polish. But you looked at me yesterday like I was just another human being worthy of courtesy. That meant something to me." They continued to dance as more stars emerged, the Milky Way spreading across the heavens in a river of light. The desert around them was alive with the sounds of evening, crickets chirping, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through sage. It was more beautiful than any decorated hall could ever be, and Rebecca felt her heart opening to this man who had shown her more genuine kindness in 2 days than most of Hawthorne's citizens had in 7 years. "Tell me about your life in the mountains," she said softly. Garrett's expression grew thoughtful as they moved together. "It is hard but honest work. I trap mostly, sell the pelts a few times a year, hunt for meat, fish the streams. Built my own cabin with timber I cut and hauled myself. It gets lonely sometimes, but it is peaceful. No one tells me I am not good enough or refined enough. Just me and the wilderness understanding each other." "It sounds wonderful," Rebecca said wistfully. "It can be," Garrett agreed. "But I have been thinking lately that maybe peace and solitude are not enough. That maybe I have been hiding up there instead of living." He looked down at her, his blue eyes reflecting starlight. "Meeting you has made me certain of it." Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest. "Mr. Anderson, you should not say such things. We have only just met." "I know," he said. "But I am not a man who believes in wasting time or hiding from truth. I am 31 years old, and I have spent the last 8 years alone because I told myself I was better off that way. But dancing with you right now, seeing you smile despite everything those cruel women put you through, I realize I was just afraid. Afraid of getting hurt, afraid of not being good enough, afraid of caring about someone who might not care back." The music from the town hall changed, becoming slower and sweeter. Garrett adjusted his hold on Rebecca, drawing her closer, and she let him, her free hand coming to rest on his shoulder. She could feel the warmth of him through his shirt, the solid strength of muscle built through years of hard labor. He made her feel small in a way that was not diminishing but protective, like she could finally let down her guard and rest. "I am afraid too," Rebecca confessed quietly. "I have learned not to trust easily, not to hope for things that seem impossible. But you make me want to hope anyway." They danced until the music stopped, until the sounds from the town hall began to fade as the dance ended. Neither of them wanted to break apart, so they simply stood together on that rise overlooking Hawthorne, hands still clasped, bodies still close. The moon had risen, a bright crescent that silvered the desert landscape, and Rebecca thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than this moment, this man, this unexpected gift of connection. "I should walk you home," Garrett said reluctantly. "I suppose you should," Rebecca agreed, making no move to step away. Finally, with obvious effort, Garrett released her and offered his arm again. They walked back toward town in comfortable silence, and Rebecca felt a pang of loss at the thought of this evening ending. When they reached the mercantile, she turned to face him, suddenly desperate to keep him there just a little longer. "Would you like to come inside for coffee?" she asked. "My uncle will be passed out by now, and it seems poor hospitality to send you off without even a cup after what you have done for me tonight." Garrett smiled. "I would like that very much." The mercantile was dark and quiet as Rebecca led him through to the small living quarters at the back. She lit a lamp, its warm glow filling the simple room with soft light, and set about making coffee on the small stove. Garrett stood in the doorway, too large for the cramped space, watching her move with practiced efficiency. "You have made a good life here," he observed, "despite the difficulties." "I have survived," Rebecca corrected. "That is not quite the same thing as living." "No," Garrett agreed quietly. "It is not." She poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and handed him one, gesturing for him to sit at the small table. He folded himself into a chair that seemed far too small for his frame, cradling the mug in his large hands. Rebecca sat across from him, suddenly aware of how intimate this was, being alone with a man in the quiet hours of the evening. She should probably be scandalized, should worry about her reputation. But her reputation in Hawthorne was already ruined, and something about Garrett made her feel safe in a way that had nothing to do with propriety. "What will you do now?" Garrett asked. "After tonight, after they excluded you from their society?" Rebecca considered the question, turning her mug between her hands. "I suppose I will do what I have always done. Run the mercantile, take care of my uncle, keep my head down, and hope people forget about this eventually." She looked up at him, something defiant in her gaze. "But I will not forget. I will not forget how they treated me or how you defended me. I will not forget this evening for as long as I live." "Neither will I," Garrett said softly. He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Rebecca, I want to see you again. I want to come back to town and take you walking or riding if you know how. I want to learn everything about you, and I want you to learn about me. But I need you to understand something first." "What is that?" "I am not a sophisticated man," Garrett said bluntly. "I have no education beyond what my mother taught me before she died. I live in a rough cabin with no amenities. I have little money beyond what I make from pelts, and I will never be wealthy. If you let me court you, if something grows between us, I cannot offer you the kind of life that women like Martha Caldwell have. I can only offer you honesty and hard work, and a man who will value you more than his own life." Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Garrett, I have never wanted to be Martha Caldwell. I have never wanted fancy houses or social position. I just wanted to be valued for who I am, to be treated with basic human decency. You have given me more tonight than anyone in this town has given me in 7 years. If you want to court me, if you want to come back and spend time together, I would welcome it with all my heart." The smile that broke across Garrett's face was incandescent. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles with a tenderness that made her shiver. "Then I will come back," he said. "I need to return to my trap lines for a few days, make sure everything is secure, but I will be back by the end of the week, and I will take you somewhere beautiful." "I will look forward to it," Rebecca said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Garrett finished his coffee and stood reluctantly. "I should go. It is late and you need rest. But Rebecca, thank you. Thank you for saying yes tonight and for giving me a reason to come down from my mountain." She walked him to the door, and in the moonlight spilling through the entrance, Garrett paused. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Until the end of the week," he murmured. "Until then," Rebecca whispered back. She watched him mount his horse and ride off into the darkness, her hand still tingling from his kiss. When he disappeared from view, she closed the door and leaned against it, a smile spreading across her face that felt strange and wonderful. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt genuinely happy. The days that followed were both easier and harder than before. Easier because Rebecca found herself humming as she worked, caught herself smiling at random moments as she remembered the feel of Garrett's hand on her waist, the sound of his deep voice speaking her name. Harder because time seemed to crawl, each hour stretching endlessly as she waited for his return. She endured the whispers and sideways glances from townspeople who had heard about her attempted attendance at the dance, held her head high even when people deliberately avoided her in the street. None of it mattered anymore. She had discovered something more valuable than their approval. On the 5th day after the dance, Rebecca was arranging a display of fabric bolts when the bell above the door chimed. She turned with a polite greeting ready, then froze. Garrett stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun, looking even more wonderful than she remembered. He was carrying something, a bundle wrapped in brown paper, and his expression was both nervous and pleased. "Good morning, Rebecca," he said, and her name in his voice made her feel warm all over. "Garrett," she breathed, abandoning the fabric and hurrying toward him. "You are back." "I told you I would be," he said with a smile. He held out the package. "I brought you something." Rebecca took it carefully, aware of the weight in her hands. She unwrapped the paper to reveal a beautiful fur, soft and luxurious in shades of brown and cream. "Oh," she gasped, running her fingers through it. "Garrett, this is beautiful." "What is it?" "Pine marten," he said. "I trapped it last winter, tanned the hide myself. It is the finest pelt I have taken in years, and I was saving it to sell, but I want you to have it. You could make it into a collar or lining for a cloak, something to keep you warm when winter comes." "This is too valuable," Rebecca protested, even as she held the fur to her cheek, marveling at its softness. "You should sell it." "It is not too valuable if it brings you pleasure," Garrett said firmly. "Please accept it. Consider it a courting gift." Rebecca looked up at him, this large, gentle man who barely knew her but was already treating her like she was precious. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will treasure it always." "Are you free this afternoon?" Garrett asked. "I want to show you something." "I can close the mercantile for a few hours," Rebecca said. Her uncle would disapprove if he were sober enough to notice, but she found she did not care. "Let me just finish up a few things and change into my riding clothes." "You know how to ride?" Garrett asked, looking pleased. "My father taught me when I was young," Rebecca said. "I do not have a horse of my own anymore, but I remember how." "Good," Garrett said. "I brought a gentle mare from a friend who runs a small ranch north of here. She is calm and well-trained, perfect for the ride I have planned." 20 minutes later, Rebecca had changed into her sturdy split skirt and boots, locked the mercantile, and was mounting the pretty dun mare that Garrett had tied beside his own larger gelding. She settled into the saddle with the ease of long-ago lessons, and Garrett's approving smile made pride bloom in her chest. They rode out of Hawthorne heading northeast, into the low mountains that rose in the distance. Garrett led them at an easy pace, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. He had clearly spent years exploring this territory, knew every spring and valley and game trail. As they climbed higher, the air grew cooler and sweeter, scented with juniper and sage. Rebecca breathed deeply, feeling tension she had not known she was carrying begin to drain away. After about an hour, they rounded a bend and Rebecca gasped. Before them lay a hidden valley, green and lush, fed by a spring that bubbled up from between rocks and formed a small pool before trickling away to water the surrounding vegetation. Trees grew here, actual trees, their leaves rustling in the breeze. It was like an oasis, a secret paradise hidden away from the harsh desert. "This is one of my favorite places," Garrett said, dismounting and coming to help her down. His hand spanned her waist easily, and he lowered her to the ground with effortless strength. "I discovered it years ago while tracking a wounded deer. Come here sometimes when I need to remember that not everything in this world is hard and sharp." "It is beautiful," Rebecca said, walking toward the spring. She knelt beside the pool, trailing her fingers through the cool, clear water. Small fish darted away from her hand, flashes of silver in the depths. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Garrett spread a blanket he had brought in his saddlebags and unpacked a simple lunch. Bread, cheese, dried apples, a canteen of water. They sat together in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree, eating and talking. Garrett asked about her childhood, and Rebecca found herself telling him things she had not spoken of in years. Her mother's laugh, her father's patient instruction as he taught her to read and cipher. The devastating grief of losing them both within days of each other, the frightening journey west to live with an uncle she had never met. "He was kind at first," Rebecca said, looking out across the valley. "My uncle, I mean. He and my aunt had no children of their own, and they welcomed me warmly. My aunt taught me how to run the mercantile, how to keep books and manage inventory. She was gentle and loving, and for a few years I was almost happy again." She paused, her throat tight. Then she got sick, some kind of wasting disease that took her slowly, painfully. My uncle fell apart watching her die. When she finally passed 2 years ago, he just gave up, started drinking, stopped caring about anything. I have tried to help him, but he is too lost in his grief to hear me. Garrett's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture of comfort. "Grief can destroy a man," he said quietly. "I have seen it happen. Lost friends to despair after they lost wives or children. It is a hard thing to watch, especially when you cannot do anything to help." "Tell me about you," Rebecca said, grateful for the change of subject. "You said your mother taught you to read. What about your father?" A shadow crossed Garrett's face. "My father was a hard man, believed in discipline and work above all else. My mother was the gentle one, the one who taught me about kindness and compassion. She died when I was 12, and my father became even harder after that. I left home when I was 17, could not bear living under his roof anymore. Tried various jobs, farming, ranch handwork, even a stint as a deputy for a corrupt sheriff in Colorado. Nothing felt right until I discovered the mountains." "What made you stay?" Rebecca asked. "The peace," Garrett said simply. "The quiet. After years of my father's anger and then the noise and violence of various towns, the mountains felt like home. I could breathe there. Could be myself without anyone judging me or finding me lacking." He looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "But lately, the peace has started to feel more like loneliness. I have been thinking it might be time to find a different kind of life, one that includes other people." Include someone special. Rebecca's heart raced. Someone special. Garrett shifted closer to her on the blanket, his large body radiating warmth. Rebecca, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I need you to understand that what I feel for you is not some passing fancy. From the moment I saw you in that mercantile, something clicked into place inside me. When I watched those women humiliate you, when I saw you hold your head high despite the hurt, I knew I had found someone extraordinary, someone worth coming down from my mountain for. Garrett, Rebecca whispered, her eyes stinging with tears. I want to court you properly, he continued, his voice intense. I want to spend time with you, learn everything about you, show you the person I am. And if you come to care for me the way I already care for you, if this feeling between us grows into something real and lasting, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, whether that is here in Hawthorne or up in the mountains or somewhere entirely different. I just wanted to be with you. Rebecca felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. I want that too, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I have been so alone, Garrett, so isolated and lonely, pretending I was fine when I was really just surviving, but you make me feel alive. You make me feel valued and seen and cherished. I know it is fast, I know we should probably take more time, but I cannot deny what I feel. I am falling in love with you. Garrett's eyes widened, then blazed with joy. He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands, his touch infinitely gentle. Say that again, he said hoarsely. I am falling in love with you, Rebecca repeated, tears spilling down her cheeks now. I think I started falling the moment you defended me to Martha Caldwell, and I have been tumbling ever since. Rebecca, Garrett said, and then he was kissing her, his lips claiming hers with a passion that made her dizzy. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. He tasted like apples and sunshine, and kissing him felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said fiercely. I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of your trust. You already have, Rebecca said, smiling through her tears. You already have. They stayed in the hidden valley until the sun began its descent, talking and kissing and making plans. Garrett wanted to continue courting her for a few months, wanted to be sure she understood what she would be getting into if she chose a life with him. Rebecca argued that she already knew everything she needed to know, but Garrett was firm. He would come to Hawthorne twice a week, would take her out and introduce her to more of the wild places he loved. They would build their relationship on a foundation of time spent together, of truly knowing each other. The next few months were the happiest of Rebecca's life. True to his word, Garrett rode into town every Wednesday and Saturday, arriving in the morning and staying until dusk. He took her to hidden canyons and high meadows, taught her to fish in cold mountain streams, showed her how to read animal tracks and predict weather patterns. She taught him about literature from the few books she owned, read to him in the evenings when he stayed for supper, discussing stories and ideas late into the night. The people of Hawthorne watched their courtship with varying degrees of disapproval and fascination. Martha Caldwell sniffed disdainfully whenever she saw them together, made pointed comments about proper young ladies not associating with rough mountain men. But others were kinder, recognizing genuine affection when they saw it. The elderly Chinese couple who ran the laundry smiled at Rebecca when she passed, murmuring blessings in their language. Tom Fletcher, who ran the livery stable, began giving Garrett a fair discount on feed for his horses, saying any man who put that kind of light in a woman's eyes deserved a break. Rebecca's uncle noticed the change in her, emerging from his alcoholic haze long enough to comment on her happiness. One evening in late September, As autumn began to paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, he called her into his room. He looked older than his 53 years, worn down by grief and liquor, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in months. "You love him," he said without preamble. "That mountain man." "I do," Rebecca admitted, seeing no reason to deny it. Her uncle nodded slowly. "Your aunt would have liked him. She always said you needed someone strong, someone who could match your spirit." He coughed, a wet sound that spoke of damaged lungs. "I have been a poor guardian to you, Rebecca. After your aunt died, I let my grief consume me, left you to manage everything on your own. You deserved better." "Uncle Thomas," Rebecca said gently, using his name for the first time in months, "you took me in when I had nowhere else to go. You and Aunt Margaret gave me a home and a purpose. I could never regret that." "But you could have had more," Thomas said. "Should have had more. A young woman's life should not be spent nursing a broken-down drunk and running a failing business." He reached into his nightstand and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I have decided to sign the mercantile over to you, make it legal. If that man of yours wants to marry you, you will have something to bring to the marriage, something of value." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. "Uncle, you do not have to do that." "Yes, I do," Thomas said firmly. "It is the least I can do to make up for the last 2 years. The mercantile is not much, but it turns a decent profit when properly managed. You have kept it running despite my uselessness. It should be yours." Rebecca hugged him, this broken man who was trying in his own way to do right by her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." When she told Garrett about it the next time he visited, riding in on a crisp October morning with frost sparkling on the desert floor, his face lit up with joy. "That is wonderful," he said, spinning her around in the street, not caring who saw them. "Rebecca, that changes things. That gives us options." "What kind of options?" she asked, laughing. Garrett set her down but kept his arms around her. "I have been thinking. I love my mountains, love the life I have built there. But I have also been thinking that maybe it is time for something different, something more. Your uncle's gift means you have a stable income, a business that is already established. We could keep the mercantile, work it together. I could trap in the winter when business is slow, help you run the store the rest of the year. We could build a good life here in Hawthorne, despite the prejudice of some of the townspeople." "Or," Rebecca said slowly, an idea forming, "we could sell the mercantile and use the money to build something new. Maybe a trading post closer to the mountains, somewhere between here and the higher elevations. Serve the trappers and hunters who do not want to come all the way to town. You know that territory better than anyone. We could make a good business of it." Garrett stared at her, admiration and love shining in his eyes. "You are brilliant," he said. "That is perfect. A trading post in the foothills, maybe near that hidden valley I showed you. There is good water there, timber for building. We could construct a cabin, a store, maybe even a small stable for travelers' horses. It would take work, but we could build something lasting. Together," Rebecca said, reaching up to cup his cheek. "We could build it together." "Together," Garrett agreed, and kissed her there in the street, in full view of anyone who cared to look. They announced their engagement in November, purchasing a simple gold band from the general store in the next town over, not wanting to give any of their money to Martha Caldwell's husband's bank. The wedding was planned for December, a small ceremony with only a handful of guests. Garrett invited his friend who owned the ranch where he had borrowed the mare, a weathered man named Samuel, who clapped him on the back and pronounced Rebecca a lucky find. Rebecca invited Tom Fletcher from the livery, the elderly Chinese couple, and a few other townspeople who had shown her kindness over the years. They were married on a cold, clear day in mid-December, with snow dusting the mountains in the distance. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town, performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. Rebecca wore a new dress in deep green, her best color, with the pine marten fur Garrett had given her fashioned into a luxurious collar. Garrett wore a new suit that made him look both civilized and slightly uncomfortable, his shoulders straining against the fabric, his collar too tight around his thick neck. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed her with such tenderness and passion that several of the guests whistled and laughed. Rebecca did not care. She was married to the man she loved, standing on the threshold of a new life, and nothing else mattered. They spent their wedding night in the small room behind the mercantile, which suddenly felt less cramped and more cozy. Garrett made love to her with exquisite gentleness, his large hands careful on her skin, his voice murmuring endearments and praise as he showed her the mysteries of physical love. Rebecca gave herself to him completely, trusting him with her body as she already trusted him with her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Rebecca felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "Are you happy?" Garrett asked, his hand stroking through her unbound hair. "Happier than I have ever been," Rebecca said honestly. "You have given me everything I never knew I wanted, a partner, an adventure, a future full of possibility." "We will build that future together," Garrett promised. "Starting tomorrow, we begin planning our trading post, designing the buildings, figuring out inventory, clearing land. It will be hard work." "Good," Rebecca said, snuggling closer to his warmth. "I am not afraid of hard work, not when I have you beside me." True to their word, they began preparations immediately after the new year. Rebecca's uncle had sobered up enough to help with the legal paperwork, transferring ownership of the mercantile to Rebecca so they could list it for sale. It took until March of 1879 to find a buyer, a young couple from California looking to establish themselves in Nevada. They paid a fair price, and Rebecca felt only relief as she signed the papers. She was leaving behind the life that had confined her, stepping into something new and uncertain and thrilling. While they waited for the sale to complete, Garrett had been busy in the mountains. He had staked a claim to the land surrounding the hidden valley, filed the necessary paperwork to establish ownership. With help from his friend Samuel and a few other mountain men Garrett knew, they began clearing land and felling trees for timber. Rebecca visited as often as she could, riding the mare Garrett had given her as a wedding present, bringing supplies and occasionally helping with lighter tasks. The work was backbreaking. They spent long days cutting and hauling logs, clearing brush, leveling ground. But there was joy in it too, the satisfaction of watching something take shape through their own labor. The main building began to rise, a sturdy structure that would house both the trading post and their living quarters. It had large windows to let in light, a stone fireplace Garrett built with his own hands, and a covered porch where travelers could sit and rest. As spring turned to summer, the trading post began to look like a real enterprise. They dug a well, finding good water at only 20 feet. Built a stable that could house 6 horses, with a small corral attached. Constructed a smokehouse for preserving meat and a root cellar for storing vegetables and other perishables. Rebecca used some of their remaining money to purchase initial inventory, carefully selecting items she knew trappers and mountain folk would need. Traps, ammunition, coffee, salt, sugar, tobacco, blankets, basic tools. She also stocked fabric and thread, knowing that the few women in these mountains would appreciate the chance to purchase such things without the long journey to town. They opened for business in August of 1879, almost exactly a year after they had first met. Their location proved ideal, situated on a trail that connected several trapping territories with Hawthorne and other settlements to the south. Word spread quickly among the mountain community that there was a new trading post run by honest people who gave fair prices and fair treatment. Business was slow at first but steadily grew as summer faded into autumn and trappers began preparing for winter. Life fell into a rhythm that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. Garrett handled most of the heavy work, restocking shelves, hauling water, maintaining the buildings and equipment. Rebecca managed the books and customer interactions, her friendly demeanor and sharp mind for business making even the most taciturn trappers warm to her. In the evenings, they would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day and making plans for the future. Their first winter was hard. Snow came early and deep, and there were weeks when they saw no customers at all, trapped by weather in their cozy cabin. But they had prepared well, stocking plenty of food and firewood, and Rebecca discovered that being snowed in with Garrett was no hardship at all. They spent long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, making love by firelight. Garrett taught her to play chess on a set he had carved from pine, and she taught him basic bookkeeping so he could help with the business side of their enterprise. Spring brought a rush of activity. Trappers emerged from their winter camps with pelts to sell and a desperate need for supplies. Rebecca and Garrett worked from dawn to dusk, buying furs at fair prices and selling the goods people needed. Their reputation grew, and travelers began detouring specifically to visit their trading post, drawn by the promise of honest dealing and Rebecca's famous hospitality. She had taken to baking bread and simple cakes, offering them to customers with coffee, and the gesture created a loyal clientele. In May of 1880, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett on a warm evening as they sat together watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars they had danced beneath almost 2 years earlier. He pulled her into his arms with a joy that bordered on reverence, his large hand settling protectively over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Garrett said. "Terrified, thrilled, grateful, all of those and more. You have given me everything, Rebecca. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Rebecca said, kissing him. "And our child will be so loved, so wanted. He or she will grow up in this beautiful place, surrounded by mountains and sky, with parents who adore each other and will adore them." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Rebecca continued working in the trading post, though Garrett insisted on taking over the heavier tasks, his protectiveness intensifying as her belly swelled. They converted one of the smaller rooms into a nursery, and Garrett spent his evenings carving a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was soft as silk, so there would be no risk of splinters. Their son was born in January of 1881, during a brief break in the winter storms. Garrett delivered him with the help of a Shoshone woman who lived nearby and had experience with childbirth. The labor was long and difficult, and Garrett held Rebecca's hand through every contraction, his face pale with worry, his strength lending her courage. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Garrett wept openly, overcome with the miracle of it. They named him Thomas, after Rebecca's uncle, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep the previous autumn. Thomas Anderson was a healthy, robust baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's delicate features. Garrett was besotted from the first moment. This huge, rough mountain man rendered helpless by an 8-pound infant. Rebecca watched him cradle their son with infinite gentleness, his massive hands supporting the tiny body with ease, and fell in love with him all over again. Parenthood changed them in ways both profound and subtle. Their days were punctuated by feedings and diaper changes, their nights interrupted by crying that demanded immediate attention. But they moved through it together with the same teamwork that characterized everything in their marriage. When Rebecca was exhausted from nursing, Garrett would walk the floor with Thomas, singing old songs in his deep voice until the baby settled. When Garrett was overwhelmed with work, Rebecca would strap Thomas to her back in a carrier fashioned from soft leather and go about her business in the trading post, the baby content to observe the world from his secure perch. Business continued to thrive. The trading post became known as a reliable stopping point for anyone traveling through the territory. They expanded their inventory to include more specialized items, tools for prospecting as gold fever began spreading through Nevada, seeds and farming implements for those trying to establish homesteads in the foothills. Garrett began offering guide services as well, leading hunting and fishing expeditions for wealthy men from the cities who wanted a taste of wilderness adventure. When Thomas was 2, Rebecca became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in the autumn of 1883, an easy birth compared to her brother's arrival. They named her Margaret, after Rebecca's beloved aunt, and she was a calm, sweet baby who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything. Garrett, if possible, became even more protective with a daughter to guard, though he was careful to treat both children with equal affection. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. Thomas grew into a strong, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track animals and read weather signs before he learned to read books. Margaret was more bookish, preferring to stay near Rebecca in the trading post, helping organize inventory and chattering with customers. A third child arrived in 1886. Another son they named James, who proved to be a happy medium between his siblings, equally at home in the wilderness or behind the counter. Through it all, Rebecca and Garrett's love only deepened. They still stole moments alone when they could, walking hand in hand through the valley where they had first confessed their feelings, making love in the quiet hours after the children were asleep. They built traditions together, celebrating birthdays with cakes and small gifts, spending Christmas mornings by the fire opening presents they had made for each other. Every year on the anniversary of the dance where they had fallen in love, they would leave the children with a trusted friend and ride out to the spot where Garrett had first taken her hand under the stars. The trading post prospered beyond their wildest dreams. By 1890, they had expanded the main building, added 2 more cabins for customers who needed to stay overnight, and hired 2 young men to help with the heavier work. They had become respected members of the small but growing community in the foothills, known for their integrity and generosity. When drought struck and several families struggled, Rebecca and Garrett extended credit without question, trusting people to pay when they could. That trust was never betrayed, and the loyalty they earned from such gestures was worth more than gold. In the spring of 1891, a letter arrived from Hawthorne. It was from Tom Fletcher, the livery owner who had befriended them years earlier. He wrote to tell them that Martha Caldwell had fallen on hard times. Her husband's bank had failed, they had lost their house, and Martha now worked as a seamstress, bitter and diminished. Tom thought Rebecca might like to know that the woman who had once judged her so harshly had learned something about humility. Rebecca read the letter aloud to Garrett as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the meadow below. Thomas, now 10, was teaching 7-year-old Margaret to skip stones in the stream while 5-year-old James tried to catch frogs. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and looked at her husband. "I should feel vindicated," she said slowly. "Martha was cruel to me, excluded me from society, made me feel worthless. But all I feel is sadness. She had everything I thought I wanted, and it turned out to be hollow." "You were wise enough to recognize what truly matters," Garrett said, pulling her close. "Martha never learned that lesson. She built her life on appearances and status, and when those things crumbled, she had nothing left." "We are fortunate," Rebecca said, leaning into his solid warmth. "So very fortunate." "Not fortunate," Garrett corrected gently. "Blessed. And we created our blessings through hard work, trust, and love. That is not luck, Rebecca. That is choosing right and fighting for it every day." As the afternoon sun painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Rebecca reflected on the truth of his words. She thought about the frightened, lonely woman she had been that night 13 years ago, refused entry to a dance, her heart breaking with humiliation. She thought about the huge mountain man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known to speak, who had taken her hand and shown her that rejection from the wrong people was really a gift. Everything she had now, everything good and beautiful in her life, had flowed from that single moment. The business they had built together, the children laughing in the meadow, the respect of their community, the deep, abiding love that sustained them through every challenge. None of it would have happened if Martha Caldwell had let her attend that dance. None of it would have happened if Garrett had not been brave enough to offer her an alternative. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, noticing her pensive expression. "I was thinking about that night," Rebecca said. "The night we met, really met, when you took my hand and we danced under the stars." Garrett smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "Best decision I ever made, mine too," Rebecca agreed. She turned in his arms to face him properly. "Do you ever regret it? Leaving your solitary life in the mountains, taking on a wife and children and all the responsibility that comes with them?" "Not for a single second," Garrett said fiercely. "Rebecca, you gave me a life worth living. Before you, I was existing, surviving, but not truly alive. You woke me up. Made me want more, be more. Our children, this business, this community we have built, these are the things that give life meaning. But at the center of it all is you, always you." Rebecca kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they broke apart, both smiling, she saw Thomas watching them from the meadow, his young face thoughtful. She waved and he waved back before returning to his siblings. "They are lucky," she said softly. "Our children. They are growing up knowing they are loved, knowing their parents adore each other. They will never question whether they matter." "That is your doing," Garrett said. "You could have been bitter after the way Hawthorne treated you, could have let those experiences harden your heart. But instead, you chose to build something better, to create the kind of love and acceptance you were denied. Our children are lucky because they have you as their mother." "They have both of us," Rebecca corrected. "You show them every day what it means to be strong and gentle, to be honorable and kind. You are the best father they could possibly have." As evening fell and the children came running up for supper, Rebecca felt a profound sense of contentment. This life, this wild, beautiful, challenging life she and Garrett had created together, was everything she had never known to want. The fancy parties and social status she had once yearned for seemed laughable now, empty pleasures that paled beside the real riches she possessed. Over supper, Thomas entertained them with stories of his exploits in the meadow, his animated descriptions making even ordinary events sound exciting. Margaret showed them a flower she had pressed between two flat stones, the petals perfectly preserved. James fell asleep in his chair, exhausted from his adventures, and Garrett carried him to bed with the same gentle strength he brought to everything. That night, after the children were tucked in and the trading post secured, Rebecca and Garrett lay together in their bed, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the walls. Garrett's hand rested on her hip, a comfortable intimacy born of years together. "Tell me a secret," Rebecca said, a game they sometimes played, sharing small truths in the darkness. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sometimes I still cannot believe you chose me. Even after all these years, there are moments when I look at you and marvel that someone so extraordinary wanted to build a life with a rough mountain man who barely knows his letters." "You want to know my secret?" Rebecca asked, rolling over to face him. "I have never seen you as a rough mountain man. From the first moment, I saw you as exactly what you are: a good man, a strong man, a man capable of great gentleness and fierce protection. A man worth building a life with, worth loving with everything I have. That has never changed, not for a single day." Garrett pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he murmured. "More every day. I did not think it possible, but I love you more now than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "Good," Rebecca said, smiling against his chest, "because you are stuck with me forever." "That is not nearly long enough," Garrett replied, and she felt his smile against her hair. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The children grew, developing their own personalities and dreams. Thomas eventually took over much of the guide work, leading expeditions into the mountains with his father's skill and his mother's head for business. Margaret surprised them by developing a talent for healing, learning from the Shoshone woman who had helped deliver her, and eventually becoming the closest thing the mountain community had to a doctor. James proved to be a gifted craftsman, creating beautiful furniture and tools that became prized throughout the territory. Rebecca and Garrett aged together gracefully, their love maturing like fine wine. Gray threaded through Garrett's dark hair, and lines creased his face, but he remained strong and vital, his body still powerful from years of hard work. Rebecca's auburn hair silvered at the temples, and her figure softened with the years, but Garrett looked at her with the same awe and desire he had shown on their wedding night. They became grandparents, a development that delighted them both. Thomas married a sweet-natured woman from one of the homesteading families and gave them 3 grandchildren. Margaret eventually married a young man who worked at the trading post, a former city dweller who had fallen in love with mountain life and with her in equal measure. James took his time, but finally wed a Shoshone woman whose people had traded with the Andersons for years, bringing together 2 communities in a beautiful fusion of cultures. Through it all, through every triumph and setback, every joy and sorrow, Rebecca and Garrett faced it together. They had built something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. The trading post was now a landmark, a place people came not just for supplies but for the warmth of community, for the example of what a marriage and a life could be when built on love and respect. On their 30th wedding anniversary in December of 1909, their children threw them a celebration. The trading post was crowded with friends and family, with people who had traveled from all over the territory to honor the couple who had touched so many lives. There were speeches and toasts, food and music, and at one point someone suggested that Rebecca and Garrett dance. A space was cleared in the main room, and someone struck up a waltz on a fiddle. Garrett offered his hand to Rebecca with the same formal courtesy he had shown that night so many years ago, when he had taken a humiliated woman and shown her that rejection from the wrong people was really a gift. Rebecca placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had never failed her. They danced in front of their children and grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, and it was exactly like that first dance under the stars. The years fell away, and they were young again, discovering each other, falling in love under the vast Nevada sky. When the waltz ended, Garrett dipped her dramatically, making everyone laugh and applaud, then pulled her up for a kiss that left no doubt about the passion that still existed between them. "Still the best dancer in Nevada," Rebecca said breathlessly when he released her. "Still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Garrett replied, and he meant it with all his heart. As the celebration continued around them, Rebecca looked at everything they had created. The successful business, the loving family, the community they had become pillars of. She thought about the woman she had been that July evening in 1878, watching townspeople prepare for a dance she would be forbidden to attend. That woman had felt small and worthless, defined by others' judgment. She had believed that acceptance from people like Martha Caldwell was the key to happiness. How wrong she had been. True happiness had come from rejection, from being forced outside the boundaries of acceptable society. It had come from a mountain man with kind eyes who saw her value when no one else did, who had given her not just love but partnership, not just romance but purpose. "Thank you," she said to Garrett, pitching her voice low so only he could hear beneath the noise of the party. "For what?" he asked, though his smile said he knew. "For seeing me," Rebecca said simply. "For taking my hand that night and showing me that being refused entry to their dance meant I got to dance somewhere better, under the stars in a place that mattered with a man who would change my entire life." Garrett cupped her face in his large, weathered hands, his blue eyes still as sharp and clear as the day they met. "You changed my life just as much," he said. "Maybe more. You took a lonely man who had given up on happiness and showed him what love could be, what partnership could be, what a life fully lived looked like. Every good thing I have, every moment of joy, every accomplishment, they all trace back to you, to that choice to walk away from their hall and dance with you under the sky. Best choice either of us ever made," Rebecca said, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Best choice," Garrett agreed, and kissed her again as their family cheered around them. They lived together for many more years, growing old in the place they had built with their own hands. When Garrett finally passed in the spring of 1925 at the age of 77, it was peacefully in their bed, with Rebecca holding his hand as she had held it through every important moment of their life together. She followed him less than a year later, her heart simply giving out one night as she slept. Their children found her in the morning, a peaceful expression on her face, and understood that she had gone to join the man she had loved for nearly half a century. They were buried side by side on the rise overlooking the hidden valley, the place where they had first confessed their love. The entire community turned out for the funeral, sharing stories of the couple who had touched so many lives. The trading post continued for generations, run by their descendants, always maintaining the values of fairness and hospitality that Rebecca and Garrett had established. And on clear summer nights, when the stars blazed across the Nevada sky, people would sometimes speak of seeing two figures dancing on the rise where the Andersons were buried. A large man and a smaller woman, moving together in perfect harmony, eternal partners, bound by a love that had transformed two lonely people into something greater together than they ever could have been apart. Their story became legend in those mountains, told and retold as an example of what love could be when it was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The dance they shared under the stars that first night became symbolic of their entire relationship, a rejection of shallow society's judgments in favor of something deeper and truer. Rebecca and Garrett had proven that the greatest love stories often begin with rejection from the wrong people, with being forced outside the boundaries others try to impose. They had shown that true worth is not found in fancy halls or social acceptance, but in the quiet moments shared between two people who see each other clearly and choose each other anyway. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the business they had built, in the community they had nurtured. But most of all, it lived on in the memory of that summer night in 1878, when a mountain man saw a woman refused entry to a dance and made a different choice. He took her hand and led her to a place where the only judgment that mattered was their own, where they could move together under an infinite sky, and discover that sometimes the best things in life happen when you are brave enough to dance in places others never think to look.